Now live from inside the Ocean Casino Resort studio, here's Mike Gill.
It was a great move by Howie and the Eagles to not only get a great player, but to take a great player from another team in your division. So that's kind of like a double hit there. You know, it's like winning a double header instead of just one game. You don't only get a good player, but you take one from your competitors. So I thought that was a great acquisition by Philly.
Bill Belichick, he likes the acquisition by the Eagles. The Giant fans, not a fan of the move, but where would the Eagles be without Saquon Barkley? 176 yards and a touchdown. The average 10 yards a carry. Second most rushing yards for Barkley in a game since 2019 when he had 189 against the, I think they were called the football team at that time. They might have been the Redskins at that time in 2019. 176 yards were the second most by a player against his former team of all time. He could have gone over that number. He kind of said, my day is done. 658 rushing yards this year is the most by an Eagles running back through 6 games in a season ever. And John McMullen is here to talk about him on the Sports Bash Live. And he is brought to you, as always, by our friends at Boardwalk Honda. Shop the lineup of new, pre-owned, and certified pre-owned Hondas online, boardwalkhonda.com. And John, obviously, he steals the show, Saquon Barkley, yesterday. And, we asked the question so much, what would this team be without him? Who are the Philadelphia Eagles with or without Saquon Barkley? And I guess the question kind of goes to, have they kind of backed themselves into the corner of what their identity should be?
Yeah, I asked Nick that today. I don't think so. Games have personalities. Jim Schwartz used to say it all the time. And if you look at that particular game, it was punt, 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 punt. So I think 7 consecutive punts, 4 for the Giants, 3 for the Eagles before the 55-yard run. So I think it's a lot dependent on the opponent, and the Eagles were not concerned with the offense of the opponent, especially when we got to see them up close. So you can be more conservative and use the run game heavily. But if you're like playing Detroit and you go punt, 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 you're probably behind 10-0 minimum. So, and that's what Nick was trying to say today. It's like, this worked out, but it was about the opponent, and sometimes you're going to run it. And if you go to the fourth quarter when the game was well in hand, they had 15 plays, 14 of them were runs. So we'll get caught up in box score. And the best thing for me about Saquon Barkley yesterday is he doesn't care about his numbers. And he's like, nah, I don't need it. I'll sit down. Let somebody else eat.
Yeah.
Doesn't care. Who cares? Who cares?
Well, listen, that's all fine and dandy, but they threw the ball 14 times yesterday. I get it. I agree with what you're saying, too, by the way. All these games have different personalities. But a really good team has to be able to do something well. And is this team finding out that this is what we do well? That we, because quite frankly.
No, a really good team. I'll stop. A really good team can do everything. And I go, Detroit's the team, right? Everybody's chasing Detroit. That's the best offense in football. 31 teams want to be Detroit. They can throw the ball. They can run the ball. They have a great offensive line. They got a great tight end. They can beat you with receivers. They can beat you with 2 different running backs. You don't know which way to look. Great teams can do everything.
That's a good point.
And that's what the Eagles are striving for.
Well,
that's what they're hoping.
So was yesterday the first unlocking of, hey, we could do this really well, and if we continue to do this well, that should help us do that well? Or do they just want to kind of wedge it in there whenever it's convenient for them?
No, they want to wedge it in for what they need for a particular week. So they want to be able to win any kind of game. And if they have to outscore Detroit, they can outscore Detroit. If they have to grind it out against a good defensive team, if there is one, they can grind it out.
Yeah.
So they want to be able to do whatever needs to be done on a particular game day. And I think that was the hope when they built this offense with the quarterback and the receivers and the tight end and the running back and the offensive line. They want to be what Detroit is.
Yeah.
That's what they want to do. The question is, can they be what Detroit is? And right now it doesn't look like it.
Right.
And that has mostly to do with the quarterback.
Well, and I was going to say, because the passing game, I know they only threw 14 yesterday, but I said, I'm sitting here today earlier in like the first hour where like, I don't remember any receiver having a catch yesterday other than A.J. Brown. I mean, it just seems like if they don't throw one up to him, what is this offense? There's no fluidity. There's no rhythm in the pass game still, and that's where you're like, okay, what is this offense? Because the passing game doesn't seem like it's caught up to where they or how effective the run game can be.
Well, it hasn't, but they know they can't go to where they want to go without it developing. So, I mean, you can win a lot of different ways in the NFL. You can certainly win a game over a bad opponent by running the football in the modern NFL. But if you do it at the highest level, you can win, but your margin of error is going to be so small.
Yeah.
You got to take the lead, and think about the first quarter aspect and struggles of this team. So, it's great against the Giants. It's semi-good against the Browns when, and that's not the Eagles' fault. The pins are placed in front of you. And like I said, there's a lot of people talking about identity. I wrote on Sports Illustrated, that's a statement game. It's not an identity game. You don't forge an identity against bad teams. That's not how it works. Again, if you try what they did against the Giants and pick your team, it doesn't have to be Detroit. I just think they're the best team in football right now. It could be Kansas City, it could be Baltimore, whomever you think is a contender. You can't play that way.
Mm-hmm.
So
and that's the thing.
You can talk about.
They win 28-3, John, in this league, and games are close all over the place. I mean, no matter how good or bad teams are, games are close. And to go on the road and win 28-3 is just kind of the turning of the corner of the. This team has just felt like for almost a season and a half now that there's been a cloud hanging over them in terms of, well, they win, but it's not impressive enough. And then they beat a team, well, that team's not good enough. 28-3 on the road. I get it. It's the Giants, but did it feel like in the around this team that finally they had that game that they were like, you know what, we took a step in the right direction?
Well, I think outside the building, inside the building, the same. I think the biggest thing they take away from that, and the biggest positive, is actually on the defensive side of the ball, because even though it's a bad opponent and it's very offensively challenged opponent, they have a very young defense, and the fact that they're growing and they have this success, and they've gone now 9 quarters without giving up a defensive touchdown. I just think that makes Jalen Carter and Nolan Smith and Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, all these young players more confident and that they can do it at the NFL level. I think it's very important for them. Offensively, they still have the same problems. They can't score in the first quarter. And Nick has talked about it for a while until he shut down. Now he doesn't want to talk about it because he's annoyed by it. It's not sustainable. He said it's not sustainable. Because, again, when you hit those good teams, you're not going to go punt, punt, punt. And if you start slowly, you're going to be looking up at the scoreboard. It might be 14-0. It might be 10-0. You're down 2 scores. You're really going to be disciplined enough to run it 45 times and throw it 14? Good luck.
Mm-hmm. Is the defense's growth, a byproduct of, hey, Vic Fangio is getting more familiar with the talent and personnel that he has? Is that, part of it, or is it the opponent?
Well, it's a little bit of both. It's part of getting. I think you see it when the Kobe Dean. He's got him going downhill yesterday. That's where he's successful. Now maybe it's just a matter of the Giants don't have the quarterback to get people in space and take advantage of it. There were a couple throws. Darius Slayton was wide open in the middle of the field. Could have been I don't know, he might have been still run. It could have been a 40, 50-yard gain, and he just missed him by a mile. I mean, sitting by himself in the middle of the field. And it was sort of like a low and outside pitch from, somebody in the championship series, just by the catcher. Wasn't even close.
Right.
And so when you don't have an advantage, that plays into it. So, but that's not the Eagles' fault. Again, you can only play who's in front of you. We have this discussion all the time. This is why, and I'll use another baseball analogy, go all Jim Schwartz. This is why baseball is a statistical sport, because you have these large sample sizes and you play every day, and it generally becomes you are what the back of your baseball card says you are. In football, it's like 17 games. And when we get to the end of the season, nobody's going to be talking about, all this against the Giants, because it's going to be mixed in. Mm-hmm. And that elevates the statistics in certain categories. And in other cases, when you're playing a really good team and they played poorly, it downgrades it. And the sample size just isn't big enough. But from the defense's perspective, it's not about the 8 sacks. It's about the confidence that it's given those young players.
Well, and 13 sacks in 2 weeks. I mean, you're starting to say, look, for a chunk of this season, they can't get to the quarterback. Now, all of a sudden, 13 sacks in 2 weeks. Are we supposed to believe that they have figured out and unlocked the pass rush? Probably not.
No. I mean, it depends. Again, yeah. If you're playing Trent Williams, you're not getting home. If you're playing Penei Sewell, you're not getting home. If you're playing Christian Darrisaw, you're not getting home, and so forth and so on. You see the same thing with the Eagles when Lane Johnson and Jordan Mailata are out there. Now, when Fred Johnson goes out there, that's another reason why it's nice to be able to run the football, because you're probably not going to hold up in pass protection. Mm-hmm. So it's – and obviously the Giants were missing Andrew Thomas, by far their best offensive lineman. The kid they threw in there was not prepared to play. So that factors into it. But, yeah, that's why I'm not really hyper-focused on the numbers as much as what it did for the confidence of those young players.
They're 4-2. All right. I don't know where you put them though in the pantheon of this, very cloudy and muddled NFC. Are they in play in your mind for a number 1 seed type of conversation, or are they somewhere in the middle? I mean, what do you make of where this team is at 4-2?
No, I don't expect them to be a number 1 seed. Although, the one team, I think Green Bay is a really good team and they beat them. So that would help them.
Yeah.
I do think, Detroit is kind of head and shoulders above everybody else. Although, Minnesota played them close, but the game was in Minnesota. They needed a defensive turnover to get back in it. And Detroit sort of went up and down the field at will. And that's a really good defense. And that's what I'm saying. This is a league where it used to be good defense beats good offense back in the old days, back in the days that Philadelphia won with the running game and all that stuff in the 70s and early 80s. Now good offense beats good defense. So when you're facing a good offense and they have their A game and they're playing well, they're going to score. Doesn't matter who it is. Doesn't matter who the defense is, they're going to score. And I think Detroit is that team. Now, you can hope the NFC North is so good that they beat each other up a little bit. And maybe if Green Bay can beat them, maybe if Minnesota can win the rematch, maybe if Chicago can split with them. But I doubt it. That team's good.
Yeah, no, I like, to me, it's Detroit is my number one. I had them number one in my Fine Five last week. I have them at the top. And then, I feel like even on both sides, I don't know that there's another team in the entire league that is on that level. It seems that it's Detroit and everybody else is kind of like in that next tier.
Well, they did lose Aiden Hutchinson. And to me, you can beat them, but if you're going to beat them, you're going to beat them 38-35.
Yep.
Something like you're going to win a shootout, and that's where, if the Eagles ultimately want to go where they want to go, they got to be able to win a shootout. And can they win a shootout right now? Not at that level.
Well, not the way like this goes back to like not the way their passing offense looks, but with the passing talent they have, you're saying why shouldn't they be able to? And that takes us to the quarterback, which you hinted at. Martin Frank, I think, asked a question today that kind of stood out to me. He said there's been no turnovers. Is that a product of not forcing, that he's trusting his guys? And I'm looking at it and I'm saying, I feel like he's tentative. Everything he does looks like it's in slow motion. So he's not turning the ball over, but, man, he's taking sacks. He gets out of that pocket pretty quickly, and anytime he goes to the left, that play is over. I don't know what to make of the no turnovers other than it just looks like he's a little gun-shy.
Yeah, and it's, they only threw it 14 times, so that limits the turnover opportunities against a bad team on top of it. So I'm not sure the turnover problems are over. But even if you look at, obviously the fourth down play to A.J. Brown, that sums up Jalen Hurts. That was a perfect throw down the field. I mean, an absolute dime in the bucket. Perfect. Shouldn't even have been there because on 3rd and 3, he had 2 receivers open, and he missed them both. And he's trying to press the football down the field, and it ends up being, I think, an incompletion, a worthless incompletion to Devontae. Then they get it on 4th down. And you say, man, the dichotomy of this guy. On one play, he looks awful, and on the next play, he looks like Jared Goff, who's got more touchdowns, that crazy stat. He's got 15 incompletions over his last, 3 or 4 games, and they scored 18 touchdowns. They've scored more touchdowns than he has incompletions. That's the crazy level they're playing at.
Right.
Now, why is that happening on 3rd down to a quarterback who can make that kind of throw on 4th down?
Right.
That's why people scratch their heads.
He does make some throws where you're like, man, that's a perfect throw. And this goes back to the things that he feels comfortable with. But if, it appears there's not enough things he feels comfortable with.
Well, yeah, he holds on to the football too much. I think that's, if you want one statistic to look at for the Eagles, because everybody loves statistics and I'm always shooting them down. If you look at his career as a starter, he's always over 3 seconds getting rid of the football, except the Super Bowl season. He was at 2.78. And he was getting out the football a little bit quick. He's never going to be 2.3. He's never going to be at the top of the league. But if he can split the difference and get it under 3 seconds to 2.78 again, that means he's making quicker decisions. That means he's more confident in what he's seeing and what he's looking at. I think then maybe it can take off a little bit. But, if you're trying, and everybody's, again, going back to the identity question. So if you want to beat a good offensive team, you got to win the coin toss, which, you got to take the football, which they never do. You got to shorten the game. So you got to go, on one of those 7-8 minute drives. You got to score a touchdown, play from the lead, which they haven't scored a point in the first quarter. And the margin of error is so small. Saw it a couple years ago, the first 49er Kansas City Super Bowl. if you remember, Kansas City wasn't playing well. San Francisco was playing a perfect game, and that was the Jimmy Garoppolo 49ers. So they were not explosive, and they were playing that perfect game for into the fourth quarter, and it fell apart, and they got behind, and the game was over. That's how small the margin of error is when you're playing explosive teams. And the Eagles have to get their identity needs to be explosive. Maybe not to the level of Detroit, but when you have A.J. Brown, when you have Saquon Barkley, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, when he gets back, you can't be grinding it out.
No. Yeah.
You got to be better.
Well, and to say that Devontae Smith didn't have a catch, I don't even remember a ball thrown his way yesterday. I mean,
he had one bubble screen that lost 2 yards. And that incompletion on third down was thrown to him, but it wasn't even close to being a completion. It was just at the sideline, and it was essentially just throwing the football away. Yeah, it's got to be better.
All right, couple quick hitters. Are they doing anything different with Huff? He had a sack. He's around the quarterback. Is there anything different that, they kind of used? Are they using him differently?
No, well, they kind of – and we'll talk to him again tomorrow, but last week he kind of flat back on, he thinks it's better being in a 4-point stance. And he wants to make him into a 3-down player. And, yeah, I'm on record. I don't think that's happening. So at some point, I think he should utilize him a little bit better. And obviously, same thing, he's gaining as it, not as young, but, he's new here. He's still a young player. First time as a really starting level player. Getting a sack and getting some success, I think the confidence might help him. But, I don't think they're using him correctly.
All right, obviously big week here. They got demoted again, John. They got demoted from Sunday Night Football next week to a 4:00 game against the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Thank you, NFL.
I can understand, Jacksonville's not very good, Philadelphia, but I thought maybe Philly, Peterson. I mean, it's not like they had a great choice. To get demoted for a Colt-Viking game, that's not a good sign.
No, but I do think it's more about the opponents than the Eagles at this point. The Eagles are 4-2. Cincinnati's been underwhelming compared to what they were supposed to be. And obviously Jacksonville's been tremendously underwhelming. And I think, remember, I believe the Lions are playing the Packers that week, and that should be the Sunday Night Football game, but it's probably the late game. I haven't looked at the schedule. So those networks are fighting to keep those games as well.
Yeah.
So, the Vikings are a team that's been good, and people think they're good. And I don't know how good they really are, but they did play the Lions tough. So we'll see if they can hold up. But right now, I think
that's the 425. That's the 425 Fox game. So Fox wasn't given that on Detroit Green Bay. There wasn't a lot of great choices. That's why I was a little surprised. Josh said to me today, "Oh, do you think that?" And I said, "I thought the window was closed." I guess I was wrong about that. I don't know. They got some weird rules for the different networks. I know Mondays are different from Sundays, and Sundays are different from Thursdays. Thursdays, I think you need 4 weeks' notice or something like that. And I guess Sunday's the least stringent of them. But, there wasn't a lot of great options. I guess Miami, Buffalo, if you get Tua, should be back for that game, I guess. That might have been a little bit more interesting, maybe.
I think Dallas, they're looking they look at it as there's 2 potential playoff teams. So, Indy's only a game back. As poorly as they played, they're only a game back at Houston, and Minnesota's obviously tied with Detroit, but would lose the tiebreaker. So I think they look at it as, 2 potential playoff teams.
All right, there you go. Sunday Night Football next week. The Eagles will be moved out of the Sunday night game. They're going to go to 4:00 against Jacksonville. This week, they got moved from 4:25 to 1:00, and you can listen to both of those games on 97.3 ESPN. All right, coordinators talk tomorrow. We'll hear John McMullen, Birds 365, Sports Illustrated here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. Thanks, John.
All right, thanks, Mike.
As always, John's brought to you by Boardwalk Honda. Shop their lineup of new pre-owned and certified pre-owned Hondas online at boardwalkhonda.com.